that's a big thing for me, that we're not all different nationalities. We're one people. And that's what I want to emphasise and carry on. We're all different, but we are one.
So Sally, where I would love to start is with a quote from your new book, Outback Teacher. I wrote home that it was a carefree country where I was learning to live, laugh, be merry, and stand on my own 2 feet. I was meeting people, talking with them about everything. Life altogether was different there. In fact, every day I thought I would like Perth less and less. The drawbacks were human inflicted. So where I would love to start, Sally, is for you to share more about this time in your life. In the 1950s, you were around 20 years old at that time, and you decided to move about 3,000 kilometres away from Perth and begin teaching in a classroom of 45 Aboriginal children.
Okay. Well, when I finished Teachers College, I applied to go to Carnarvon because that's where they were Aboriginal and white mixed. And my dad had been chairman of Native Welfare Council, and I had done a lot with Aboriginal welfare type things. But then they asked me, would I go to Forest River Mission, which is, way up and out of Wyndham. And, of course, I jumped at it because it was adventurous. And I knew that my uncle, the Reverend Ralph Thomas, was on the board. And, off we went. My Auntie Coral made me a farewell cake with a big open-mouthed crocodile on the top. And then, I flew off. But getting to Forest River, it was so different from here. So different from Perth. I had no idea what to expect, but, I just loved finding out things. I was a very keen girl guide and got my Queen's Guide certificate, so loved camping and loved adventure. And it was certainly adventurous because, going on the barge, getting on from Wyndham and a little you walked out over rocks and glass and so on. You get on the barge, and then they said, oh, well, lucky we didn't see any crocs tonight. So then on the barge for a long time, sort of stop at the mouth of the river for the tide to change to take you up. So it was quite an adventurous trip. But the welcome was lovely. Of course, the wet was on, and the weeds, when we have wild oats here, the cane grass is well over your head. And everything was green. And, of course, there were mozzies and midgies and everything. But lovely people, lovely, welcoming people.
And as you mentioned, you were in the Girl Guides, and I've got written down a little saying that you shared in your book. You said, a guide smiles and sings under all difficulties. How did you bring that into your life during this experience?
Often. A lot of times, because, as a Girl Guide, you are learnt to take on challenges, and if you fail, you just try again. Quite often at the mission, there were hard times. A lot of, because I was very young, I was only 20, and a lot of the other staff were a lot older. But there were situations when, when you said 45 kids, that was only for the first week or 10 days because the other teacher was coming up by boat and her boat got caught in a cyclone. So I only had that 45 for those first few days. And then when she arrived, of course, she was a well-qualified teacher and had been there. She was pretty insulted that they would send a young teacher. But again, this girl guiding was behind me all the time. This smile and sing under all difficulties. Look for the positives. Look for something good in it. So I could always, when you're with little kids, you have to be happy and you have to try and make them smile and laugh. So even if you're feeling a bit sad yourself, you try and make a kid laugh. And
Yeah.
it works. It works on yourself too.
And there were definitely different teaching methods between yourself and some of the teachers that were there. And to my understanding, the teaching method particularly that I found interest to was in relation to, like, quote unquote, disruptive pupils. And you shared what worked for you is just being able to talk with them, make them feel important, involved, and useful. Can you share more about how that was important for you?
Okay. Yeah, there was only one other teacher. We taught face to face, and our kids sat back to back. Yes, it's funny. I didn't remember saying that, but now I do workshops with prisoners, and sometimes you get some smart aleck who wants to show off. And that's the same with those little kids. If you get someone like that who's wanting to show off, you give them a job to do, or you praise them for something other than what they're doing. And that works. It does, because that satisfies their need to have attention without it being in a disruptive way that they were trying to do in the first place. If you get me?
Yeah, I definitely do. And what is your perspective on, say, punishment then? Do you feel like there is a place to punish disruptive pupils, or do you feel like it more leans on what you're suggesting is just being able to sort of talk with them and humanize them and make sure that they feel important?
I think there is room for punishment. Yeah, I suppose I would call it that way. In Port Hedland, I used to give them the job of going out and picking a milk tin full of bufflegrass seed, which was sold, and the Pindan Cooperative got the money for it. But that didn't work really, because they just loved doing it. And they would ask if they would get their friends to go out and do it with them too. So, but it just stopped them from what they were doing that was wrong at the time. And that's what would be a good aim. Because when I was at Teachers College, we learned then that if you hit a child, you had failed. And in those days, the cane was well and truly used. And the other teacher did walk around with a cane in her hand, which made it very difficult for me, trying not to do that sort of thing.
So in your time on the mission, Sally, I know there was moments where you felt disillusioned and you felt that at times it was doing more harm than good. Can you share more about what you mean by that?
Yes. I've been trying to ask, my Auntie Coral is still alive, and she's 101 now.
Wow.
And she was the husband of my uncle who was on the board. And I've asked her, why did missions start? Was it to look after the people, or was it to try and evangelize or train them to be good Christians or something like that? She couldn't really answer it. And I find it hard because at Forest River, there wasn't any stations anywhere near, and they could have still lived out in the bush. It was very easy. I went walkabout with them and we lived off the land, and it could have been done. So I did wonder, why they stayed in the mission. And I could understand the main missioner. If he asked them to do something and they said, no, you can't make us, or something like that. Well, I know there was a big bushfire out from the airport, and he asked them to go out and put it out. He said, come on, let's go and put it out. And they said, well, what will you pay us? And that's when I thought, why are we here? Why is the mission here? Why aren't they going out bush? If they're being looked after, they've got houses, they've got food, they've got everything. If they're not going to obey the sort of rules of the mission or what's best for everyone, why are they here? That did come to me a couple of times, because it was hard at times, but then something good would happen a day or two afterwards, and they'd come round and they would, apologise, and all would be well again. Because it was before the days of drink, so there wasn't that going on at all.
Yeah, I found this interesting in your story, Sally, it was sort of in a way I'd never thought of before in talking about when people began to provide, say, food, and particularly around food, actually, you were suggesting that it was kind of taking the Aboriginals away from their traditional way of life because so much of the foundation was built on going out into the lands and finding food to support everybody. And when sort of bringing that in and making that easily accessible, it kind of slowly started to strip away some of that traditional practice.
Yeah.
Can you share more about what you learnt through that process?
I did go out in the bush with them quite often, and I had a rifle. And you needed to kill to eat. It gives me horrors now to think of the things that I did shoot and kill. But the bush tucker was very good. We could have lived off the land. But I suppose having houses, I don't know. I'm not answering that question really well.
The perspective was impactful for me, Sally, because it did make me think. And, I've done quite a bit of volunteer work in Kenya, and, it's always a topic of discussion on where the line is between genuinely helping people and potentially not. And I feel like it's very subjective, and it depends sort of where you fall in terms of, are you implementing the help? Are you receiving the help? And there seems to be a conflict between the two at times, even when people are well-intentioned. So I thought that was really interesting perspective. But I think this kind of plays into also, which I think is a very strong theme in your book, and it's this idea of integration over assimilation. Can you speak more about that?
Yeah. Certainly. When I left home, the idea was to assimilate people. But my dad, with Native Welfare Council, he was determined to integrate, which meant making a good emphasize the value of their culture, pick out the good things in it, and let them carry on like that. And this did happen at the mission. We could go up to the camp in the weekends and do corroborees. And one of the big things that I do remember very clearly is being taken out to the spot where there had been a massacre back in 1926. One white man got killed because he broke the Aborigine spears. And when the police came out, they couldn't find that man. So this is just how the kids told me. It's just in a sentence, like it's very minute. So they rounded up all they could find and shot them. And it was at this site. And old Louisa, the woman I was with, and she said, the people won't come out here because of the devils. And I said, well, why are you coming here? Why are you bringing all the kids and so on? Aren't you frightened? She said, well, I know they exist, but God is stronger. That's what they had learned, what she had picked up on the mission, that there was a stronger power, but it was still important that the best of their culture was brought out and developed. And we tried to do that. I did try to do that with the kids too, but things were, well, it was harder. And something you said before, it was almost like tossing up whether you were spoiling them,
right?
Or looking after them, or should you let them alone? Should you be encouraging more their old culture, the good parts of it? Because there was some of it that was pretty bad, but most of it was really good and protective. And that's what we should have been encouraging more, I thought. And this is why the integrating was so important to me. They loved that. They did include me in things, which was so good.
Yeah, I think they're very profound questions, and I think they're very relevant questions even to this day that most people are trying to seek answers for. And it's a complex situation. Obviously, these experiences are not just in Australia, but around the world. And I think it has so much to do with, in your own experience, being on the ground with the people, I think is going to sort of provide the best answers in moving forward. And around this time, Sally, the stolen generation was still very real for the Indigenous Australians. And what I found interesting about your story is that it didn't touch on it too much because, to my understanding, it wasn't truly part of your experience. Can you share more about that time in your life and your understanding of what was happening during that period?
Yeah. Yes, I had never heard of the stolen generation. But, well, there was this dormitory that I talk about, the dormitory children, and they were either orphans, their parents had died, or quite a few of them were kids that had been sent in from cattle stations, and they were usually mixed blood. So they'd been sent in by the station owner to be educated. And they were all happy. And the ones that after school, after leaving, and were free to go back, they carried on. I didn't notice any unhappiness about the so-called stolen generation. Yeah, but I know that there are some that was a lot worse. Some that were grabbed unknowingly and so on. That was terrible. But, well, these kids were looked after and had a lot of fun.
And in your book, Sally, a line that I thought was very interesting is you said, "It's a great pity that skin colour can blind some people to another's worth." Can you share more about your perspective of that, even to this day?
Yes. Oh, yeah. Well, I can tell you one thing. My nephew has an Aboriginal partner, and I asked her, she's not full blood, and there I'm using that word again, but I asked her when I was writing this book, I said, what is the best term to use? Black fella, half caste, yellow fella, mixed blood, Indigenous, First Nations people, what do you like to be called? She said, I'm a business executive.
Interesting.
Yeah, and that was just so good. Yeah, so
it's very powerful.
Yes, but I do know that sort of, well, even I look at a dark skin and immediately I think, now where have they come from? What's their story? Yeah, so we look at people as being different, and someone with Asian eyes too. I will ask, it's interesting, but they probably don't like to be picked out like that. And after I'd been at Port Hedland, I went back up to Forest River a couple of years later for a holiday, and the kids said, Harley Jidja, Jidja means sister, Harley Jidja, sing us songs from Port Hedland. So I did an emu dance, and so on, and they roared laughing. I thought, oh my God, what have I done? And I was so embarrassed. They said, not that stuff, Jidja, rock and roll, jive, So in a way back then, they wanted to be assimilated. See, out on the mission, they hadn't had the colour racism and so on that you would suffer in a town, because they wanted to be like whitefella. They used to have movies. And when we went out bush, the kids put up a little bit of corrugated iron they found, and they pretended they were watching a cowboy movie. They were giddy up and So they wanted to be the same then because, well, they just hadn't suffered racism and they hadn't been in a mixed place. That was my idea. And all of this is my ideas. It's not, might not be genuine, and it could be people who disagree.
And to this day, Sally, you work in the Alternative to Violence project that's based in WA in the Northern Territory. And I'm curious, because you do work with Aboriginals in this setting, in speaking about sort of that experience of race and assimilation, how have things changed from then to their experience in life now, that you feel, that is in your opinion?
Oh, I don't quite get that. AVP is all around Australia. It's actually worldwide. And I've actually been to Kenya doing work.
Oh, beautiful.
Yeah. Yes, I did over there.
Yeah.
Oh, I don't know. Just one experience in Darwin prison, another lady up there, Elizabeth Kwan, and myself, two old women doing a workshop with all coloured men, all either full blood or there was some part Africans and so on. And I apologised. I said, I'm sorry that we don't have any young men to come in and do the workshop with you. And they said, no way. Like grandma's better. Grandmas don't criticise us and don't compare us with themselves. And you just listen. So, you know, in that way, it was quite good. Because we weren't pointing out we're different colours or different nationalities or anything. We were just grandmas.
Beautiful. Yeah, I feel like there's quite a balance to it this podcast is called To Be Human. So obviously I'm very passionate about sort of being connected with absolutely everybody by virtue of being human. But there obviously also is an element of appreciation and respect for people's history and their experience and how that plays into their present. But it's certainly, I think, you know, if you're well-intentioned, it's a discovery process and it's a learning process that we can all share together.
What was your question?
It wasn't really a question. It was a statement,
wasn't it? Yes. And I was care and...
Well, I do have a question, Sally, because I know that
sorry.
You know, your father brought you up as a pacifist, and I found this incredibly interesting, and certainly I assume this is sort of plays into now your work with Alternative to Violence Project. Yeah. Why is this important to you? And I guess also, you know, what is pacifism?
Okay, well, in Quakers, one of the main philosophies is walk cheerfully over the world, answering to that of God in every man. And in AVP, Alternative Violence Project, we look for the good. So to me, it's just another O in the word.
Right.
And that is so important, I think. I mean, even the sort of person who has done something really terrible is in prison, they have good points. And to emphasise those and to praise them for that, it takes away their desire to do the wrong things, I think. And with Alternatives to Violence Project, that works so often. We get some wonderful comments afterwards. And when the guys come out of prison, they join us on the outside and do workshops with community. But they know what temptation is. And so it's so good to have them there. Yeah, and usually they can also say why they were like that. You know, go back to upbringing or what happened to them. Yeah.
I absolutely love that. And, you know, I do that in my own work, is trying to get to the core of the problem at hand. And I think there allows for that element of humanity and compassion and being able to understand that people are the way they are by virtue of their experiences. And I think it's very important for us to lean into the understanding of that before we place judgment.
Yeah. And look for the good.
Yeah.
Raise the positives. It works.
And one of your biggest lessons, Sally, was that violence breeds violence. So I can only assume by virtue of that, do you believe that peace breeds more peace?
Yes, definitely. Yes.
And you've seen that in your work with the Alternative to Violence Project?
Oh, yes. Because it's a 3-day workshop And on the first day, some of them are a bit anti, you know, they just sit through it. No. By the second day, they're starting to take a bit of notice. And by the third day, they'll be thanking us and saying what a difference it has made to them, that they can see why they were like that. And, you know, hopefully when I get out, I'll be able to come and join you, but also I will be able to get on with my missus and I'll be a good dad. Some of them, that we ask them what they're aiming to do when they get out. And so often it's to be a good dad, to be a good dad and get a good job. And they feel that they've been helped to think like that. And that's what I think would be so good on these Aboriginal settlements too, because a lot of them there is no work. And so, yeah, it would be so good if everyone had a purpose in life. I think they had to earn their money and there was a bit too much giving outs.
Yeah, I did find that fascinating about you sharing your story, Sally, and this kind of plays into what we've been speaking about is understanding, charity, I guess, like being able to provide resources to people in this world and understanding whether it improves the quality of their life or does not. Because I know in your book you kind of share when money started coming into these communities and food and access to all these things were possible, there sort of began these other challenges that people were facing in terms of gambling, and then kind of moving forward from that sort of played into drugs and alcohol. And I know even more recently you've kind of been in contact with some of your former students and the communities that you worked in, and there were people within that are a lot younger who are struggling with sort of drugs, alcohol and addiction.
Yes, and that is a bit of the sad part of when I'm going to Port Hedland, because that Port Hedland mob, you know, the Pindan Cooperative, it was so different from the other. Every area is different. You can't just say this is what Aborigines are like. No way.
Right.
So you've heard about the strike.
Yes.
It's in the book. Yes, so it was in 1946. The Aborigines round the Pilbara went on strike from the stations because they wanted more pay and better conditions, because a lot of them just lived in camps and worked for the station owner. But that mob then started businesses of their own. They started mining and selling tantalite, beryllium, manganese. They made fiberglass boats to sell. They carved pearl shells, stock whips, and I got these people into the school at the old railway shed in Port Hedland to teach the kids how to do their things, because that it didn't make them feel important. They were important already, but it was using their skills to pass on to the kids. And that mob was just brilliant. I have a lot of respect for it, and I'm hoping that when I go to Port Hedland June the 2nd to do a book launch, that I will see some of my ex-students, but a lot have passed on. And once they got into the town, yes, drugs and alcohol took over. But, you know, that was the most amazing and wonderful experience to have those nearly 40 kids coming in from the bush. They couldn't speak English. I couldn't speak their language. But they belonged to this very important group that had done wonders for their people. Bernie Mitchell and Peter Coppin were the leaders, and they had separated from the person who had organised the strike with them, and he was staying out in the bush, but the others wanted to come into the town so that their kids could get an education. And they were nearer the port for mining and things like that. So that was a most amazing experience, that Port Hedland lot. Yeah.
And in your experience from, 20 years of age up until now, what is one of the most important lessons that you have learnt in working with Aboriginal people?
Ooh,
Or even working and living with them.
Yes. Oh, respect the culture. Look for and emphasize the good that was in their culture. I mean, there were some bad things, yeah, true. But there was a lot of good things, and they're all family oriented, and the family is very wide. I mean, when I was at Forest River, they had 4 skin names, females and males. And Randolph Stowe, who was there, and I, who was, we were given skin names, so it was all right for us to walk out together in the bush.
Wow.
But just those sort of things, some of their culture was really very good. And the way they support each other, which is very hard in a town now, if there's an Aboriginal policeman, for him to be arresting family groups, that sort of thing is very difficult, and it would be. But I just want there to be more school teachers, more nurses, more all of those sort of things. And it is working. There's a lot of places. You don't hear all the good things because there are in the towns, there is a lot of education going on, and a lot of Aboriginal kids are going to uni, that sort of thing, and becoming nurses and doctors and members of parliament. Yes, so no, the time is coming. It's coming, I'm sure. When I just like, well, you can see my United Nations flag back.
I can.
That's a big thing for me, that we're not all different nationalities. We're one people. And that's what I want to emphasise and carry on. We're all different, but we are one.
Beautiful. I love it so much, Sally. Thank you so much for this conversation. And thank you for sharing your story in your beautiful book, Outback Teacher. It was a beautiful, lovely read, and I feel very privileged to have read your story from such a young age and to be able to connect with you at your point in this life. It's been a beautiful journey.
Thank you, Jennah. I love talking to you. You've done a really good job too.
Thank you.
I'd love to talk with you otherwise outside and talk about Kenya and what you did there.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. Let's do it.
Okay.
So, Sally, I have one final question for you. What does it mean to you, Sally, to be human?
Well, to me, it is a privilege. I think we're very lucky to be human. But I do try to be positive, to be protective, be peaceful, create peace. Protective means protecting of all the universe, the life, the world, the atmosphere, the people, the creatures, everything like that. It's all the P's. Positive, protective, and a peacemaker.